Hello, everyone, and welcome to Healthy at Work. My name is Catherine Wilcox, a workplace health specialist with a big passion for helping people thrive at work. From the home office to the corporate office, from the assembly line to the front line, I've got you covered here for your healthiest life at work. Now let's dive into today's show. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Healthy at Work. Catherine here, and if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see my dog Rue is here with me as well. The 10-year-old Boston Terrier. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you might hear him as well. He likes to snore. He's old, so we'll give him a pass on that. Welcome. I'm really excited about today's episode. So I called this episode Mental Health for Middle Managers. And sometimes when you see a topic like this, you think this might be an episode about how to support the mental health of other people in the workplace if you're a manager. It's not. This is actually an episode for you. If you're somebody that works as a manager, that leads a team, that reports to, directors, higher ups in the organization, that is responsible for executing, for taking care of people, for conflict resolution, for, supporting people emotionally, but you have no budget, tools, resources, training to do any of that. Welcome to middle management. This is actually where I spent the bulk of my career when I was working within organizations, is in this layer of the organization. Again, a place where we don't necessarily have all of the decision-making ability. We don't necessarily have all the line in sight to everything that's going on at, the top of the organization, but yet we're expected to support people, get the work done, follow directions, and do it with very little emotional support. So it can be a very lonely place. And so I wanted to create some supports, tools, resources for people such as myself who've lived through that experience of, leading in this middle layer of the organization, especially in light of what has come out in Gallup's 2026 Global State of the Workplace report. So those of you that work in the field of, employee experience, workplace health will probably recognize Gallup as one of those, trusted names out there. This is an organization that's been around for a long time and is very well known for its work in research, analytics, advisory around employee engagement and experience and leadership and work performance in general. And every year they put out a report that, shares what is really going on around engagement from a global perspective. So the Global State of the Workplace report is out, the 2026 version, and some really staggering findings when it comes to this layer of management that we're talking about today. So we're talking about managers. And one of the things that the 2026 Gallup report reveals is that global employee engagement is declining. And the main driver behind this is actually manager engagement, which is also declining. In fact, what was discovered is that manager engagement in the workplace has dropped by 9 percentage points since 2022. Amazing, hey? And what we know is that when managers disengage, employees do too. So what we tend to notice, and what Gallup has discovered through its work, is that manager engagement and employee engagement are really tied together. And for many years, what was noticed is that the higher numbers we see around manager engagement, generally the better engagement we get from employees as well. But in this year's report, what we see is that managers are not well engaged, and that this is actually contributing conversely, to this equation where we see employee engagement also declining. So very concerning. and also not surprising, to be honest, from my point of view, because we know that leaders of frontline people have a huge impact on the mental health, the well-being, the emotional experience, the employee experience of people in the workplace. Huge impact. And again, this is well demonstrated by research. But we know that people at this middle layer aren't functioning well. And so in today's episode, I wanted to talk about some of the reasons for that. What are some of the contributing factors to us, noticing these impactful numbers around disengagement and leaders across the world in 2026, and what can leaders do about it, and what can organizations do about it? So middle managers are a very easy scapegoat when things are not going well in our culture, right? Often what we see is blaming leadership, right? For not showing up, not having time, not supporting staff well enough, not executing and implementing and delivering on the direction that is sent from above. And so managers, again, very easy target when things aren't going well in an organization. But let's look at what's really happening, for people who are carrying this invisible load when you're operating in that middle layer of an organization. So let's take a closer look at this to examine, how do we get into this place where managers are so disengaged, more so than they ever have been, according to Gallup's research, since they started measuring, these types of metrics. I think increasingly we're understanding that middle managers carry an invisible load. They are expected to satisfy their leaders. They often receive direction, strategy that they are asked to implement, often with very few resources, be they those financial or emotional or practical, in terms of staffing. And they're also the touch point, for the teams of people, right, that are also expected to execute and deliver. So you are in this position where you are caught in the middle, right? You're trying to satisfy multiple needs, the needs of a team who's living the work, who's doing the work on the ground, as well as leadership and that next level of the organization that might not actually have a great line of sight into what is actually happening on the ground. So middle managers are in this space where they're trying to translate for executive and for more senior leadership the barriers, the challenges, what is happening actually in practice, and that might not, again, be very well understood, by the people at the very top of an organization. Nor do sometimes the frontline staff and teams that you're leading understand, what is happening, in that layer of the organization where resources are being allocated, decisions are being made, strategy is being set. So the manager is sort of the conduit, right, between these different levels. And so it can make it very difficult when you're in that position, to feel as though you have people that you can share your struggles with, right? So it's very difficult to vent up, right? Because again, you would be venting to your boss or to people who, could impact things like your performance review, your career in the organization. Right? There's a lot of systemic power there. Nor is it appropriate for you to vent to your team, right? Many managers, and I definitely felt this, in many positions that I've held, as a leader over the years, feel as though they need to protect their team in some way, right? They want to make their team successful, to support them. They don't want to burden them, with things that are happening, at the uppermost layers of the organization as well. So there's this very difficult position that I think managers can find themselves in. And it can become very lonely, actually, in that place where you feel like you don't have anyone to bring those concerns to. So let's look at some other contributing factors as well when we look at what is happening with this middle layer of the organizations that we're working within. Um, It's a hard transition, I think, from becoming an individual contributor to a leader. So in 2026, if you are a middle manager, you are expected not only to be an expert in what you do, what you're leading, right? The work you're leading, but also to be a coach, to be a conflict resolution specialist, to know how to support employee mental health and what your role in that is, um, to be able to lead through change skillfully, which requires emotional intelligence, deep listening, being able to hold human experience. And these might not be skills that you come in with, right? Depending on your field, where you work, what your training programs are. Maybe you have access to this type of learning and training, or maybe you're coming in with it already, based on who you are or other places that you've worked. For some leaders, this is new. Right? They don't have experience in conflict resolution. They don't know about basic mental health awareness. They may have no competencies when it comes to things like equity, diversity, and inclusion. Maybe they've never heard about reconciliation or thought that that could be a part of their work. And yet in 2026, these are the important things for leaders to be paying attention to. They're going to help them be successful. And yet they may receive, again, no support nor training, nor capacity or time allotted in their workday to actually do any of those things well. So it's kind of putting them into an impossible position, right? And something's got to give when you're in an impossible position. And what I most often see, as a workplace mental health specialist, is that it's the person's mental health and it's their well being that gives, right? When we have all of these expectations around capacity and there's no support to help meet some of those demands. So that's something else we really need to take a critical look at. What are the skills that help managers thrive in this, world we find ourselves in today? It's a very different world than it was even several years ago. So we need to keep up, and we're often not keeping up when it comes to supporting middle leaders. Okay, so now let's turn our attention to what you can do if you're a middle manager and you are nodding your head, along to this episode. If you are saying, yes, I am expected to be a coach, a therapist, a conflict mediator. I'm expected to know how to support the mental health of my team, lead through change. And yet I've received no training in any of these areas. I feel out of my element. I'm not sure what to do. I don't have the right support. If you're nodding your head along to that, if you're nodding your head along to, yes, it is a lonely place for me. I feel alone. I feel like there's no one I can go to. I can't go up. I can't go down. If there's something that I need to debrief or if I'm stressed, who do I turn to? Where do I go? I have some things to try. So firstly, boundaries. Now, you've probably heard me talk a lot already about boundaries on Healthy at Work. I think it's such a critical skill for operating in the 2026 global workplace. Knowing what's of value, knowing where to focus our time and energy and attention, knowing what to say yes to and what to say no to. This is a critical skill, a critical skill. And it's one that is so protective of our mental health. And I appreciate that setting boundaries and limits can be very uncomfortable. And in some work situations, can even be risky for some people, right? We're afraid, if I say no to my boss, could I lose my job? Could I not be seen as a team player? Is that a career limiting move for me? If I say no to my team, will that have impacts, on my relationships with them, right? So there's a whole host of work in here, I think, for middle leaders around boundary setting and understanding what that looks like in a very dynamic and complex position like the ones middle managers hold, right? Where you have multiple people you're answering to and responsible to: your team, as well as senior leadership also. So what does that look like? I think it looks like helping. Let's start with senior leaders. If you're somebody that reports up in your management to a director or a senior executive team, how can you help that group understand what it's really like? What it's really like on the front line of your organization, whatever that looks like. Sometimes there is such a disconnect between what is going on the front line and what is happening at more senior levels of the organization that it becomes so difficult, it's such a burden for the manager to be able to bridge that and translate that when the gap is so large. So what are some of the ways we can do that? Increase that sense of visibility and understanding. um, I think it's always really wonderful when our senior leaders actually have visibility in the organization and are willing to have skip level meetings as well. What does that mean? It means that, executive are willing to actually meet with frontline staff, that they are walking around in the organization, noticing, what's happening. Maybe they shadow some work so that they understand, from at least, some kind of perspective, what it's like to work a day, in this environment. That, is something that can help bolster the sense of understanding around the world of work, right? So that that burden of translation becomes a little bit less on that middle layer. As a manager, you can also help bring forward those issues for the team. Invite your leader into your team meetings, for example. Is there the opportunity to raise, these concerns as a group, together? That's another idea. If that's not possible, in the time that you do have with, senior leaders in the organization, thinking of ways, again, to kind of make more visible that invisible burden that's being carried. So, helping understand, what is being managed and what day-to-day work actually looks like. So one idea there. And the reason why I suggest this idea under, the general area of boundaries here is, when there are new asks, when we are asked to implement direction that we know feasibly is not going to work, because we're closer to that front line of work, we have to help our leaders understand that and understand the reasons why an idea or direction might be difficult. So we have to increase that visibility, right? And so one example of using a boundary around this is if there's a new idea that comes forward, we might have to say, yes, that's a great idea. And these are all the other things that are going on right now in the team. So if we want X to happen, what's our strategy for managing Y, to be able to, again, help leaders really understand what's happening at that level. So that's one idea. Increase that line of sight, increase that visibility, and ask your leaders to help you, prioritize once they have a great understanding of what is on your plate and what day-to-day work looks like and what some of those barriers and challenges might be to implementing direction. So that's one idea. Second idea, find a friend. Find a friend, find your person, find some people, find some support, find a network. That loneliness that comes with being in the middle is something that I have seen erode people's confidence as a leader and their mental health and well-being. And one of the ways we can avoid this or mitigate some of the impact of that is by not being alone. And so we need to find trusted people. That might be in your workplace, but it also might be outside of it. I think one of the challenges that middle managers often have is that they can't vent up, they can't vent down, and they want to be able to share and debrief appropriately, right? And that might not be appropriate, to debrief in either direction because we have responsibilities and accountabilities to both our team and our senior leaders as well. So, can you find a coach? Can you find a counselor? Can you find somebody outside of the workplace, right? Where you're also able to maintain appropriate confidentiality, to share some of what you're struggling with. That's incredibly important that you have a place to bring that, where, you can be unburdened. You can unburden some of the things that you're struggling with. And so those are some ideas. Also, finding, peer leadership groups. So within your organization, depending on its size, if there are other middle managers and other leaders on your team or in other divisions or other areas, how can you connect with those people around some of your shared challenges? I think organizations that provide peer groups and networks for middle managers notice the benefit, right, to building kind of that cross-functional support and connectivity. And there's great benefit, I think, for managers as well, to be able to have access to that, access to their peers in an organization. So find support, find people. Don't be alone in what you're going through. You're likely not alone in what you're going through as soon as you start reaching out about it. And then the last thing I wanted to offer today, knowing that managers, are at a very low point in their engagement, that they are susceptible to burnout and stress, and that it's very difficult, to be a leader in 2026, is, to really understand that as a manager, you are also an employee. So sometimes when we think about employee experience, where our mind automatically goes is to the person on the front line, right? You are also an employee. And more importantly, you are also a human being. Now, leaders are often seen, in my opinion, through the lens of their title only in an organization, right? That's a director, that's a manager. And that does not mean that that does not come with additional power and responsibility and accountability. I fully realize that. And what is also true at the same time is just because you have a title does not mean that you're also not human and that you don't have human needs. What does it mean to be a human leader in 2026? When I think about all the stress and all the pressure that, is put and all the expectation that's put on that middle layer of an organization, those middle managers, I think about the importance of emphasizing, it's okay to be human, that you're not perfect, that you are doing your best, often with expectations that are incredibly unreasonable. And you may be getting unreasonable expectations from both above you and below as well, right? That could be the expectation to be constantly available to your team, to your leaders, to last minute requests, the expectation to be in 3 different meetings at once. I know I've been there. It could be the expectation to be a counselor, a coach, a conflict mediator all at once on any given day. And so, my invitation to you, if you are a middle manager and you're struggling and you're not sure how you're going to keep up, is to know that yes, you are a manager, you are a leader, you have that title, but that does not mean that you're not a human. And in fact, the type of leadership I think people respond the most to is a person-centered type of leadership, right? Where their leader is able to say things like, I got that wrong. I'm sorry. I messed that up. I don't know. Or here's what I know. I don't know what the future is going to look like. I don't know where we're going to be. Those types of skills, those ways of being humanize us to other people. And so it also, I think, allows us when we're able to show up in those ways, to lead with our emotional intelligence, to lead with humility, to lead with vulnerability. Those are the behaviors that inspire trust, right? And they also allow us to support ourselves, right? Because we navigate so many unrealistic expectations as middle managers, right? From both above as well as from our team, coming up from our team, right? So, how do we be on our own side and not put unreasonable expectations on us, right? How do we not perpetuate that? Um, because it is an interesting question to sit with. Who is on your side, in the organization? Who is supporting you? You spend a lot of your time probably trying to make your leader look good and help them be successful. Probably also, if you're doing leadership well, trying to do that for your team, right? You're trying to support them and elevate them. Who is supporting you? And so make sure that at least you are supporting you, right? And that's by allowing yourself to be a human. That's what I've got for you today, everybody. I really appreciate your listening to Healthy at Work. And if you found value in anything you heard today, I would really appreciate it if you would, rate this podcast, if you'd share an episode with someone that you think could use it, or that you'd consider reviewing this podcast as well, so we can get it into the hands of more people. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, I hope you'll be well and take care of yourself and each other. Thanks for listening today. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not medical advice or mental health treatment. If you're struggling at work, please reach out to the supports within your workplace or community. This podcast was gratefully recorded on the unceded and ancestral homelands of the Lekwungen-speaking people of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations.